All right, so what if you had in your house hidden a treasure of great worth? We'll take from the parable of our Lord. Or if you had out in your backyard. But let's use your house, it's warmer in Minnesota. A treasure. Or what if you had in your house a door, a hidden door that opened onto paradise? But you didn't know it. So you'd be living in your house with this treasure hiding, this door hiding, as though it wasn't there. Right? So now what if somebody told you that there was a treasure hiding in your house, or that there was a door hiding in your house that opened onto paradise? Now what? Now what? Buy insurance, okay. Now it changes. Yeah, now you start looking for an insurance agent. I would think that you would want to be told where it is, where the treasure is, where this door is that opens onto paradise, how to find it, how to open it. And I feel that this is what the church is proclaiming to us. He's telling to us that in your house, in the field of your soul, the house of the inner man, there's a treasure. There's a door that opens onto paradise. And the church is proclaiming to us how to find it and how to open it. So that's what I feel that the church is doing. That's what I see us doing with our Bible studies here. We're reading St. Paul, for example, we're reading St. Paul to discern, to hear from him, where is this treasure? How do we find it? Where does this door? How do we open it? So we're looking at Ephesians, and you remember that we came to a point, it was about 4 weeks ago, we came to a point in Ephesians in which, where we began asking the question about the will. So I haven't forgotten that. And what we have been doing the last 2-3 weeks is preparing is trying to prepare the ground, if you will, so that we begin to understand and to talk about the mystery, the phenomenon of the will in a theological way, not necessarily in a philosophical way, but in a theological way. So we have for this morning, we have the epistle reading from Colossians. And I was reading in Colossians, of course, getting ready for tomorrow, for the sermon this morning. And the epistle reading this morning actually ends at verse 11. But I kept reading. Verses 4 through 11, chapter 3, verses 4 through 11 are very good. But that's not the end of it. It keeps going. And I was struck by this verse, chapter 3, verse 15. In light of all that we're talking about here in this class, these last couple months, let's do Colossians 3, and I think it's a commentary on Ephesians. I think Ephesians and Colossians interpret each other. So Colossians 3:15, St. Paul says this. He says, "Let the peace of Christ govern or direct or judge your hearts." Let's see. No. Actually, it'd be better to say this. Be the governor. Be the director. Be the judge in your hearts. want you to think about that. And tell me, there's a hidden, it's implying, it's let the peace of Christ be the governor in your hearts. There's some, what's it saying? There's more to it than meets the eye. Think about it. What? Let the peace of Christ be the governor in your hearts. Let the peace of Christ be the judge. Let it be the director in your hearts. How can the peace of Christ be the director of the peace of your heart, in your heart, if it's not there? Okay? So this suggests, this is telling us is that the peace of Christ is in your heart. So let it be the governor. You know? Don't fight it. Don't resist it. Don't squelch it. Let it. Don't go looking for it even. Just let it be the governor. Let it be what directs you in your hearts. Now, let's go back to what we were talking about last week from Ephesians chapter 2, chapter 2, verse 1, talking about this world, or this kingdom, perhaps, of Satan. This kind of, this is going to be a bit scrambled perhaps this morning, so you're going to have to think hard and try to discern what I'm trying to say. Because this kind of came to me just last night, standing at the altar for vigil. All of a sudden I kind of saw all of this. And so I'm trying to put it together here on the spot. But all of these things are coming together. You remember that, in chapter 2, verse 1 of Ephesians, and you were dead in your trespasses. In other words, and remember that word for trespasses means that it means basically lying alongside a corpse, and in your sins. In these you were walking. In these you walked. Okay, now listen. In these you walked. Okay? What is the picture drawn in your mind? Where are these trespasses and sins that you're walking in them? Are they outside of you? Or are they inside of you? Yes, they'd be inside. They'd be inside. So as we're reading these, look at the picture. Listen, here's the picture. In these, you formerly walked in accordance with or following the age of this world, according to the ruler of the power of the air, the spirit that now is active in the sons of disobedience. So St. Paul calls it elsewhere. He calls it in Romans chapter 7, he calls it the body of death. So I'm wondering if we could say that, if we could use that word. So we were walking in this body of death that quote unquote lives according to the age of this world, which is a life of death. It lives in death. The body of death lives in death. But notice that this mass of sins and trespasses that we're living in, that we're walking in, notice that it has an energy. It has an energy, an action. It's active. It's not. Even the corpse is active, is it not? It's deteriorating, right? Decomposing. So things don't just stop with a corpse. They keep going. But they keep going in the direction of complete disintegration. So this mass, this body of death, of sins and trespasses that I'm walking in, this darkness that I'm walking in, it has its own activity. It has its own action. And then he goes on to say, and draws the picture even more colorfully, if you will, in these also you all, in which also we were all of us conducting ourselves before in the passions of the flesh. And as I said last week, this verb in which we're all conducting ourselves, I mean, in which we were turning. So it's like a corpse buried in the casket. This is a casket. Casket in the ground. So wherever the corpse turns, it's in the darkness. It's in the casket. It's under the ground. So that's what we were like when we were walking in these in these sins, and the activity, the energy of these sins and trespasses is given here in verse 3 in the desires of our flesh. The desires, the lusts of our flesh, such that we were doing the will of the flesh. We were doing the wills of the flesh. So here's the will, and this is what we run up against, isn't it? When we decide to follow Christ, we run up against this energy that is in us. You know, this dark energy that is in the tomb of our heart, is the substance of our heart, this energy, and we're not free. And then this is the way this reads: is we are not free. We're not doing what we want to do. We're doing what the flesh wants us to do. We're doing what our flesh wants us to do. We're doing what our thoughts want us to do. But our thoughts, you know, we're doing the will of the flesh and of the thoughts. I mean, we're children of wrath, just as we're all the rest. These thoughts, you know, where do they come from? And these desires of the flesh, this will of the flesh, where is it coming from? Where is its origin? Where is its source? What would you say? And I think it's given in what we just read. Anything come to mind? I would say that it comes from this age, according to the ruler of the power of the air. This is where this will comes from, this will of the flesh comes from, such that we are doing the will of the darkness. You say the devil, that's okay. Basically, yes, we're doing the will of the darkness. We're doing the will of this spirit, this dark spirit, whose energy is active within the sons of disobedience, which, as he goes on to say, at one time was all of us. All right? So, let the peace of Christ, let it be the governor in your heart. How is that at all possible? So you understand, as I'm thinking about this, and as I was standing at the altar, so many things came together, and I was able to appreciate, to understand, I think, what was driving, what was the motivation, or what underpins primitive Christianity. Remember, we were over the summer we were discussing the Liber Graduum, the Book of Steps, which is written in the third of 300s, 400s, a text from early Syriac Christianity, which I think is significant because early Syriac Christianity was directly in contact with the Church of Jerusalem. And so that means, the primitive church. So I'm quite confident that in these Syriac texts, such as the Book of Steps, there's also St. Isaac of Nineveh, St. Ephraim of Syria, whose Hymns in Paradise we were talking about last year. There's also the St. Romanus the Melodist, whose troparia, many of whose troparia we sing in our liturgical worship. He was from Syria. St. Dionysius the Areopagite was a Syriac. So in this Syriac theology, we get this vision of we have a window into the mind, the theological mind of the early church, of the primitive church at Jerusalem. And you remember that this Book of Steps shows that reality is on three levels. There is the church, there's the visible church, or the visible reality, and then there's the church of the heart, and then there's the church of heaven. And it's not that these are on parallel tracks and just kind of, unconnected to one another. They open onto one another. It's like there's a mystical gate in the visible church that opens onto the heart. The heart is deep beyond all things, as Jeremiah the prophet says, which is very much an Edenic picture. Remember that Eden is drawn as a mountain in St. Ephraim of Syria. And the top of the mountain is where the tree of life is. But if this is, so here's the earth, well, obviously this is heaven. And so if the tree of life is at the top of the mountain, the tree of life is beyond all things. It's not here, it's up here, it's beyond all things. And the heart is described as being deep beyond all things. So the heart is placed right here, at the very place where earth meets heaven, time meets eternity. Man opens onto God. This also, by the way, is the mystery of the temple. What was it? 2 falls ago now. We had this series, What Did Longinus See? The centurion that was watching over the crucifixion of Christ. So they're on Golgotha, which again is a mountain. And it says that at the moment that Christ dies, Longinus saw the curtains of the temple, rent in two. Well, excuse me. But he's on Golgotha. He's doing well if he can even see the roof of the temple. So how is it that he's seeing inside the temple to where the curtains are being rent in two? And then it goes on to say, and many of the dead arose, they were raised from their graves, and they went into the, I can't remember now how it says, the heavenly city or something like that. It's written in such a way that if you're a Muggle, you're going to think it's talking about Jerusalem. But it's also written in such a way that if you're not a Muggle, if you're sharp, you'll realize that he's probably talking about the heavenly Jerusalem. But that doesn't happen until 3 days later. So we have this mystery at Golgotha in which both time and space are they're collapsed, and Longinus is seeing it all. How is it? How is it possible that Longinus, standing there on Golgotha at the cross, which we call the tree of life, is seeing these things that spatially he cannot see, and temporally he's not there yet? It's because the mystery of the cross is the mystery of the temple. That's the center of the universe. It's the center of time, the center of space, the center of everything. It is the beginning. This is the beginning. So we have the visible church opens. It has a mystical, an inner mystical spiritual reality, which is the heart. The heart is deep beyond all things, so that the heart, when we say the heart is deep beyond all things, the prophet is telling us that this is where the heart is. It's at the beginning. It's in the beginning, where earth meets heaven, time meets eternity, so forth and so on. All right, so hang on. This is the heart. This is what has been darkened. This is what's been darkened in us, as a result of our trespasses, and we have become a corpse. And so we have this. So it's like within us, we have. We're a tomb. We're a sepulcher, full of dead things, naked bones, food for the worms and stench. This is all dead in there. Now, there's another teaching here that comes into play, that as I see it. Faith, we think of faith as a faculty of the intellect. But in the understanding of the church, man is composed of body and soul. And the soul is divided into various parts too. Oh, I can't remember them all. There's the desiring, let's say. I think that's one, which might be also called the appetitive or the appetite. There's the emotive, I think, which might be where you had anger and wrath and all those things, those kind of emotions. But then there's also, in some fathers, there's what's called the spirit. This might be connected with this, so this might be the intellective. Now, what you see here is that the mind is not the deepest part, if you will, of the human composite. The spirit is. So you have the body, and then you have the soul, and then you have the mind, and then you have spirit. And faith is a faculty of the spirit. It's not a faculty of the mind. With the mind, you learn geometry, you learn mathematics, and you become a mathematics teacher. You become a Tony. But with the spirit, that's where, deep, deep, deep within us, we turn one way or the other way. Here is where you could say we are free to turn which way or that way. But this is also to say, and the Father, it's interesting, with the catechumens, and I think with the teens 2-3 years ago, I did an experiment with them, and it's amazing how it works. I had, it's just this last fall, I had Matthew get up, and I told him to walk to the Amvon. So what do you think he did? He walked to the Amvon, but of course as he's walking to the Amvon, and I do it here with one of you, but I don't want to take the time. We noticed that his trunk was always in the direction that he was going. So I told him, Matthew, look over here. So he looked over here, but he kept going towards the Amvon. So his head was turned here, but his heart, if you will, was still towards the Amvon. When he turns his heart, well, you can still do it, but it's kind of more difficult. It's more natural to do it, to follow your heart. So it's interesting to me that the Holy Fathers would say that faith is the heart moving towards God. You might think that faith could be just any kind of movement, because faith basically means, in its kind of etymological meaning, means to turn. So you could think that faith is, so you have the scientists whose faith who is in the atom, let's say, and you have the theologians whose faith is in their mind. Then you have the faithful whose faith is in God. But actually what the Fathers would say is that faith is only that movement that is moving towards God. And if one's heart is not moving towards God, that person is called faithless. He has no faith. So faith is being a faculty of the Spirit. It's like the mathematical potential of the mind. In order to develop the mathematical potential of the mind, you have to practice it. You have to exercise that mathematical potential. So also with the Spirit. In order for the Spirit to develop the faculties that are natural to it, the Spirit has to be developed. It has to be practiced. It has to be exercised. All right, so what I'm driving at here is that there is this there is this the height there is in the human composite, in the human body, within each of us, within the house of our being, within the field of our being, there's a door. And what I'm saying is that the Spirit is the door that opens onto paradise. But what St. Paul is, the picture that St. Paul is drawing in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1 and 2, is that the Spirit, the deepest part of me, that part of me where I open onto heaven, that part has fallen and become like a corpse, and now it's lying on the ground off to the side of the road, half dead, and it's all dark. And St. Paul draws the picture here in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 3, where he says, in which also we all were turning before in the desires of our flesh, doing the will of the flesh and of our thoughts. So here we are. Our spirit is dead. It's still active, and there's this spirit that's very active in the spirit. It's a dark spirit, and the activity is an activity of disintegration, so that everything is decomposing, but there's still this strong activity. And my spirit is caught in this dark energy, so that this dark energy, taking the will of my flesh, my thoughts, it turns me this way, it turns me that way, and no matter which way I turn, I'm caught in this darkness, in this corpse, so that wherever I go, wherever I turn, up, down, side to side, it's dark, it's dead, so forth and so on. So you have the picture. All right. Now, this is going to be a difficult question to frame. I don't want to give it away because I want to make you think. I want to make you work a bit. If you would think back and let's list, if we can, even the places. I don't know how the places, the venues. I'm going to give it away. Even the chambers in which we find the source of our salvation. Can you name them? I think if we name just one, you'll get the idea. Who is our salvation, by the way?
Christ.
Christ is our salvation. And how does he save us? I go to the very beginning. How does he save us? Don't give me the cross. Go before that.
By taking our flesh and becoming one.
And where does he do that?
In the womb of
Okay, so the first one, here's one place. Womb of the Theotokos. The womb of the mother. All right? There's one source. Another source. Go through the history. Another source of our salvation.
The entrance, the baptism.
Excellent. The Jordan. Because he goes down into the waters, and according to the icon, he slays the evil one even there, and they went in the waters. Where's another source?
Well, the next obvious one would be the wilderness. He goes to the wilderness and tempted.
Well, it's interesting. Okay. I hadn't thought of that. We'll work with it.
You think you go chronologically, that's the next one.
Okay. 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 We'll work with that. What's the next? What's that?
Mountain.
The source of our salvation. If you want to go with mountain, I'll stay here. Because the Theotokos is the mountain. Now this is obvious. Come on now. This last one should be fairly obvious. The tomb. This is what I see. Now the Theotokos, as we were just saying, is the holy mountain. But the Holy Mountain is Sinai or Zion, Jerusalem. And so all of this has to do with the temple. Okay? The Jordan, these are the waters of what? Creation. And so we were talking, I think it was some years ago now, we were looking at John chapter 1 and speculating that perhaps theophany is hidden in that opening prologue of John, although you could also say that the birth of Christ is also hidden in the prologue of John. In the beginning, in the womb of the Theotokos, in the waters of the Jordan, in the temple was the Word. And the Word was with God. The Word was in the dark. The light shines in the darkness. The light shines in the darkness of the tomb. The light shines in the darkness of the depths of the Jordan. But the Jordan, death cannot overcome it. The wilderness, this is the place of death. And it's generally, it has multiple layers of meaning. One of these layers would be that it's the realm of the dark powers, because this is where death reigns. Nothing lives there. And that's why the monastics will go into the wilderness to face death, face to face, head on, and to wrestle with the evil one, mano a mano. And then the tomb, of course, is also death. But now, here's why I went off onto the three levels of reality, in the early Syriac Christianity, and thereby an a fortiori Jewish Christian theology. These are all visible, and so they would be elements of the visible church. And if they are of the visible church, well, what's underneath them? You have to think theologically now. Because obviously, if you look underneath the womb, well, there's a couple of legs, or you want to say, but we're not thinking like that. We're thinking theologically. What's underneath the mystery of the womb? What's underneath the waters of the Jordan? What's underneath the tomb? The mystery of the tomb, what's underneath it? Yes, thank you. Exactly. It's the mystery of the heart. So, now, we find Christ in the womb. We find Christ in the waters of the Jordan. We find Christ in the tomb. We'll go to John's prologue, for example. What are some titles given to Christ? He is who? What?
The Word.
He's the Word, the bar, I'm going to say. Because when we say word, let's not think of word like we think of word. Let's think of word like a Hebrew word, dabar, which means what's in the way back, at the very beginning. This is the word, the back of the sanctuary. So it's the absolute truth that determines everything. Okay? What else do you find in John's Gospel? First 4 verses. What else is Christ called? Or even,
The Word was God.
Okay, he's God. Keep going. There's lots of titles here. What does he say to Mary and Martha? I think it's John 11:25.
Resurrection.
What's that?
The resurrection.
And
Life.
I am the resurrection and the life. John 1:4. What does it say? Was it 1:3? He was in him was life,
Light.
and life was the light of the world. So he's the light, the true light. He's the light that the darkness cannot put out. All right? So, visibly, on the visible realm, we see this man named Jesus. And unless somebody tells us, we're not going to know that his name, Jesus, was not given to him by Joseph or by Mary, but by God. Which suggests that God must be his Father. Because it's the Father who gives the name. So his name is Jesus, but we find him in the womb. We find him in the cave. That's another place you might go to, the cave. We find him in the Jordan. We find him in the tomb. Okay? But in terms of the spiritual layer that's underneath the visible, what is this Jesus that we find here? What is he? You understand? He's all of this. So in other words, what we're finding in the womb of the Theotokos, when we see Jesus in the Theotokos, in the womb, we see the Word that is the truth, we see God, we see the resurrection and the life, we see light. The darkness cannot be put out. And that's what we see in all of these venues. But now, all of these chambers, womb, cave, Jordan, tomb, I like to say the wilderness of the soul, their spiritual reality is what? Dan? Try it again. Same answer. The heart. So that the visible picture that we see here is the outward aspect. You know, it's the face, it's the outward face of the mystery of God, the true light, who is the life of all, who is himself, the resurrection and the life. He is the one that is found in the heart. That's what these pictures, I mean, you read them visibly. You read them, and again, if you're a muggle, all you're going to see is the visible. But the church is telling us there's another dimension underneath that. It's the spiritual. And on the spiritual realm, what we're seeing, what's being proclaimed to us is that your heart is the tomb. Your heart is the womb. Your heart is the cave. Your heart is the Jordan. Your soul is the wilderness. And the church is proclaiming to you that in your heart, in your soul, God himself, the resurrection and the life, has planted himself. He's in there. Now we go back to Ephesians chapter 2. And there's this vivid picture of the state of our inner being, our inner man, as St. Paul calls it elsewhere. You were dead. You were lying alongside a corpse, in your corpse-making deeds, and in your sins. You walked in these. You were walking in death, according to the age of this world, according to the spirit of the power of the air, of the spirit that now was active in this. In other words, this disintegrating, corrupting, decomposing spirit was active in you, and it's active in all the sons of men of disobedience. And in this you were walking, you were conducting yourself, you turned every which way, and you were still in it. What's he painting here? Is this not a picture of the tomb? Specifically. It's a picture of the tomb. Hang on, just a minute. Okay, so where is Christ found? If not precisely in the middle of this age of darkness. That's where he's found. That's where he's buried. That's where he's buried. Tim?
Well, I think also because of the fall, there's a dynamic that he's also touching on, and it's a dynamic that's described, I think, in the beginning of Ecclesiastes and in passages like in the Psalms where it says, "As for man, his days are as the grass."
As the grass.
So it's an existential description of the fact that we are painfully aware of the tragedy of human life, that we are born, that we experience great things, that we can see great things, and yet we will pass away inevitably. So there's this despair, this underlying despair and anxiety, and that's what clouds our nous.
Yes.
Our mind, yes.
That's the death of this. That's the death, at least the way I understand it. And so the pagan mind wanted to dissolve, as you brought up a number of times. They wanted the boundaries of the ego to dissolve.
Yes, right,
so
right.
they could, and then for them it was the natural world.
Yes.
That was the deep archetype of
Yes,
what they were.
yes, yes.
But they lose the hypostasis. They lose a person.
I would say, yeah, go ahead.
And that's what's in the bottom of your heart, is the hypostasis. Of two.
Yes, the hypostasis, or another word, biblical word, would be spirit. This is the same thing as the hypostasis.
So that's what we've got to pop the lid on.
And this is what has died. The hypostasis, what stands underneath us. What stands underneath is dead. And you're describing it in existential terms. And the church, what I'm saying is that this is the proclamation of the church. That into the midst of that despair, okay, so what I'm seeing here is that even beneath your will, because the will is the movement, is it not, of the mind? Or even more deeply, it's the movement of the spirit, the heart. That's the will. It proceeds from the heart. So what I'm saying is that what I hear in the church's proclamation is that deeper than the will, deeper than the heart, deeper than the movement of my will, or even in the middle of the movement of my will, God has planted himself in the flesh. That's the thing, in the flesh. Which means that he has planted himself in me. When we say in the flesh, we mean that that he was completely human. He had a human mind, a human soul, and a human body. And he sanctified the whole human nature that was in him. And this is what was planted in the earth. Your body, you can see the imagery here, becomes like the womb of the Theotokos at Holy Eucharist. Now you are receiving into yourself, completely, in a sense, independent of what you understand, independent of your morals, independent of your state of, independent of all of that, you are receiving this sanctified, deified body and blood of God as your food and drink. And this now is what's in you. Those who have been baptized, and those who have been baptized, they have been brought into this election, this place of election. And this to me is what gives the force of Colossians 3:15. Let the peace of Christ be the governor in your hearts. Let the peace of Christ be the governor in your hearts. That means, to me, Dan, do you want to say something? You're just stretching?
No, I do, but I don't want to interrupt.
Okay, let me finish this thought. That what that's telling me is that regardless of my emotional state, my psychological state, I have some good, you're despairing, you're in depression, you're severe depression, suicidal even. Regardless of all that, Christ is in you. He's deeper than the despair. He's deeper than the darkness. He's in the darkness. And the darkness can't put him out. That's what this is telling me, that this is what's in me. So let the peace of Christ be the governor in my heart. Is the peace of Christ the governor of my heart? Well, I don't think I can say that it is. Why isn't it? Is it because it's not there? No, it's not because it's not there. It's there. So why isn't it the governor of my heart, in my heart? It must be because I'm not letting it. Somehow my will is messing things up. And it's not allowing the peace of Christ to be the governor of my heart. And this, I think, is going to get us into, it'll get us into what we're reading from the Epistle of Colossians this morning, which is the earlier section here, where he talks about, I think what he's saying, and when he says put to death what's earthly in you, what he's saying is, put to death in you this stubbornness, whatever it is. You know, this cockiness, this conceit, in which you think you know all the answers. You think you know how to do it all. Put it to death. And the fact that you have these earthly things in you is manifested in the fact that beneath all of your machinations and all your strategies and all of your grand plans, there's this secret energy that's moving within you that manifests itself, as he says, in fornication, impure thoughts, anger, wrath. Don't tell me that the peace of Christ is reigning in your heart when what's reigning in your heart is all of these things. This is the evidence that there's an energy, that you're still giving yourself to this dark energy. So this is what you have to be putting to death. Well, then how do you put it to death? I think that's what the church is all about. You do the church. You say the prayers of the church. You come to the services of the church to the degree that you're able. And when you come to the church, you don't just come, you come to pray. You come to receive the words of the prayers. You come to be immersed in the words. You let those words of the prayers wash over you. You let them work on you. You let them enter you. You contemplate them. You study them. And then when you leave with those words. Those words now are what's moving in your soul. And those words, if they carry Christ, that means that the energy of Christ is what's working in your soul. And this is what's going to help us put to death what's earthly in us. I can't put to death what's earthly in me. I mean, how can a corpse put itself to death? You know? It needs something else. And it needs somebody who's alive to put the corpse to death so that the corpse can be raised to life. If you follow what I'm saying. Dan, did you have what you...
Well, I was going to ask, when we say the prince of the power of the air, would it be correct to think of that as like air as in mind and thought?
I think so.
That we're
the spiritual
out of
world.
the earth and we're going to the next lower.
The spiritual world, the invisible, immaterial world. Which is an interesting point, because what that tells me is that, listen, this darkness, even though it's dead, don't think that it's weak. And it's weak, it's weak, its strength comes in the power, its power to put to death what God made. To cause disintegration. But its power is also manifested in this fascination. It's a spirit. There's a fascination. And I'm thinking that the reason our society today is in so much, darkness and this way. It's in so much trouble is because we have swallowed the Kool-Aid, we've drunk the Kool-Aid in which we think that, okay, there's no God and everything can be explained by quote-unquote science. We can explain everything by science. We don't need spirits, we don't need angels, don't need demons, all of that old-fashioned stuff. And so as a result, we have become easy prey to the spirit and the fascination of the dark spirit. And it now is able to consume us at will. Because we even deny that it exists. We think that we are, man is the measure of all things. We don't realize that the dark spirit is even bigger than us. Even the dark spirit is bigger than us. And the only way that we can, find the spirit, that this is the beauty of it. The dark spirit is bigger than us, and yet the spirit of light has planted itself in the heart of the darkness, and the darkness cannot put it out. So if we can acknowledge our weakness, that will help me to put all of my marbles, if you will, onto the power of Christ's cross. And by taking up my cross, working to deny myself, doing what the church tells me to do, to work on allowing the peace of Christ to manifest itself, to come. It's like I'm rolling the stone away from the tomb of my heart, and I'm letting the radiance of the empty tomb begin to live in me. Now the peace of Christ is going to be my governor. It's not easy. It's hard work. The Lord himself acknowledges that. He says, the kingdom of heaven is taken by violence. You don't just waltz into this door that's hiding in your heart. You've got to find the tomb. You've got to find your darkness. And you've got to go into the wilderness with Christ and into the tomb so they can put all of that to death. Barb, you had a question?
No, it was a psalm verse yesterday that stood with me. Christ can lighten my darkness.
Whoa,
It was last night.
Was that,
It just struck me. It was just one of the psalms that Rachel read.
Sure. So for the Kathisma, you wonder if that's what was in the mind of St. John when he wrote, the light shines in the darkness. Our darkness cannot comprehend it. All right, we need to get upstairs.